Okay, I'm going to be reading from a book I wrote many, many years ago. Uh, Something around 2007 is when I think it came out. This book, Haunted Indianapolis and Other Indiana Ghost Stories, that I wrote with my friend Jonathan Tichenal, who I haven't spoken with in probably 6 years. I don't quite know why that is, but anyway, I thought this is a video I should have made a long time ago. Um, Again, the book Haunted Indianapolis and Other Indiana Ghost Stories, which I wrote in 2006, 2007, is when I think it came out, and it's been a steady seller for a number of years. It's a book chock full of Indiana ghost stories, the sort of thing that I like, and I'm going to be reading a chapter from it. The book's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those online retailers, and it can also be ordered from brick and mortar. It can be found in brick and mortar bookstores, I'm told, or it has been found in brick and mortar bookstores, usually in the local interest section, and it can be ordered from Amazon, Barnes and Noble, the different places like that. It's available in many libraries. I've been delighted at picking up other ghost books and finding it in the bibliography section. But it's the very first book I legitimately published after self-publishing novels and different things like that. And it definitely takes me back through memory lane. And people seem to like it. People seem to like the book. So, without further ado, here is an audiobook excerpt from Haunted Indianapolis and Other Indiana Ghost Stories by Tom Baker and Jonathan Tichenal. And it is an old tale, an urban legend, and it's called Mr. Death Comes Calling. And it's about a strange individual, Mr. Sheaves. And okay, without further ado, here we go. My next tale for you came to me first as a bit of apocrypha. I can't vouchsafe for the veracity of this particular gem, but I can say that when it first was told to me around a campfire one evening while camping out in high school, it seemed to me to smack of the truth, and even seemed strangely familiar. It takes place during that most spectral of all seasons, Christmas, a ghostly time when the ancient story of Scrooge again takes prominence on late-night cable television. This story takes place in Marion during the Depression, and it involves a typical family struggling to make ends meet. If we try for a moment, we can step back through the doorway of our mind's eye and journey through the years to the front yard of that little home. Looking in the window, we can see the mother as she hurriedly tries to prepare an all-too-meager Christmas dinner. The father has just gotten up and put on his coat. With shovel in hand, he heads for the back kitchen door, walking past his wife as if nothing is wrong. She hurriedly gets up from putting a pot in the oven and says, "Bill, you're not going out on Christmas Day, are you?" The husband, who had every intention of staying in bed, reminds her that times are tough, and they could use the extra money he can make shoveling out walkways. Somewhere, Junior and his brother have stirred, and one might be sitting on the stairs reading a battered old comic. She leans forward, kisses him, and says, "I am the luckiest woman in the world. Just be back soon and be safe, okay?" He promises her that he will, and in the meantime she hurries to prepare dinner. After an hour or so, the smell coming from the kitchen is sumptuous, and both boys start to sneak peeks into the broiling pot before their mother shoos them away. Upstairs still is a little sister, the baby of the family, very ill with what the doctor thinks might be pneumonia. It is another hour before the boys help their mother set the table, and the family sits down, still waiting for the father to appear. Later, the mother will take a bowl of chicken broth upstairs and try to get her daughter to eat. For now, though, she is starving, and she glances up out of the kitchen window as she fiddles with pots and pans, expecting her husband to come sauntering through the snow-covered backyard, up the walk and through the back door with his boots covered in snow. She waits, starting to get anxious, and finally she sees his familiar, comforting shape emerge starkly against the gray and white world outside. Strangely, though, he is accompanied by another man. She goes to the back door and looks outside. Most definitely, he is walking side by side with a man who looks like he might be some old hobo or bindlestiff. "Bill," she calls out, "dinner is ready." He smiles at her and then says, "This is a friend of mine. I invited him in for dinner. He's all alone this year, you see." She looks at him, a little perturbed, but says nothing and invites the strange man into their home to sit at their table. He is very quiet and dressed in a black fedora, black coat, black trousers, and patched boots that look a size too large for him. She sums him up in her mind as a hobo, but he looks even stranger than that, like a ragged old undertaker. Her sons look at each other apprehensively, so she quiets their doubts by saying, "Boys, your father has invited a guest over for Christmas dinner today. This is Mr. Sorry, I didn't get your name." "You can call me Mr. Sheaves," he says slowly. His voice has a strange hollow ring to it. "Yes, well, pleasure to meet you, Mr. Sheaves. Boys, isn't it a pleasure to have Mr. Sheaves with us this afternoon?" Neither of them say anything, and the family begins to eat when they become all too frightfully aware that their father and the strange man aren't touching their food. The wife says, "Well, boys, dig in." But the men continue to sit staring, albeit with strangely serene looks on their faces. She leans over to see if she can smell alcohol on her husband, but notices none. She says, "Look, I worked damn hard to give you this meal today. The least you can do is bother to eat it. I know you must be starving." The two men continue to sit there silently, and suddenly the wife becomes upset. She rises, picks up a bowl, goes to the counter and grabs a ladle, and begins to spoon broth into the bowl, all the while saying, "I don't know what type of game you boys are playing, whether you've had a snootful or not, but I never thought I'd live to see the day my husband would act like a total moron in front of his family. Now I'm going to go upstairs and feed our daughter, Bill, and when I come down, maybe you'll have snapped out of it." Frightened, she takes the bowl upstairs, leaving her two boys downstairs munching apprehensively with her husband and the bizarre Mr. Sheaves. She goes down the little hall and into her daughter's room. The child is lying in a little bundle beneath her blankets, and she sets the soup down on the dresser, nudging her gently to try and rouse her from her sleep. Then she notices the child's face rapidly turning blue, and she hears the small, suffocating sound of her trying to get her breath. Something is desperately wrong. She yells for her family, and the eldest son comes charging up the stairs. She turns and tells him to run next door and call an ambulance. She goes to the top of the stairs and calls her husband, then hurries down, only to find her small boy still sitting at the table with tears in his eyes. She has no time to concern herself with him, however. She leans out the back door, yelling at her son to hurry, and then charges back upstairs. The child is apparently still alive, although she looks like she is on the edge of death. It is an agonizing few minutes before the ambulance arrives, and the child is rushed to the hospital where, by a thin margin, she survives her bout with pneumonia and her close brush with death. The mother accompanies the ambulance to the hospital, momentarily forgetting everything except the welfare of her gravely ill child. It was only later, fuming with anger, that she returned home to find her two sons still alone. She thinks that her husband had at last taken leave of his senses and left his family for good. She begins to cry bitterly, emotionally shattered from the strange events of Christmas Day. Her sons do not know how to react. Suddenly there is a knock at the door, and the eldest son goes to answer it. It is a portly man who lives down the road. She knows him from church. He's a policeman. It is evening now, and has only been a few hours since her daughter was rushed to the hospital and her husband disappeared. The man has a heavy, somber look on his face and says, "Ma'am, I am sorry to have to tell you this, but your husband met with an accident this morning on his way out to shovel snow. He slipped and hit his head on something and must have laid out in the snow unconscious for hours. We think it was hypothermia that got him." The realization washes over her in an awesome wave, and she begins to cry more loudly, pressing her hand to her mouth. She stumbles into a chair as the man makes a quiet exit. She is emotionally overwhelmed now to the point of perhaps nervous breakdown. Suddenly, her young son approaches her and, putting an arm around her, says, "Ma, don't worry about it. Before Daddy and the man vanished, Daddy told me that he would never be back again, but that he made a deal with Mr. Sheaves so Sissy could stay. Now, heaven will just have to wait for all the rest of us."